The air in the Quartermain mansion was thick enough to choke on, a suffocating blend of expensive perfume, nervous perspiration, and the heavy scent of white lilies that adorned every surface of the living room. It was a Thanksgiving wedding, hasty and desperate, yet dressed up in the finery of a royal affair. Willow Tate stood at the makeshift altar, her hands trembling slightly in Drew Kane's firm grip. She looked beautiful, fragile, like a porcelain doll that had been glued back together one too many times. Her eyes, wide and glassy, darted toward the guests Michael, his jaw set in a line of granite, holding Wiley and Amelia close, Tracy, looking as if she smelled something rotting, and Brooklyn, clutching Chase's arm, her face a mask of worry. "Do you, Drew Kane, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the officiant asked, his voice droning over the tension in the room. Drew smiled, that charming, disarming smile that had fooled half of Port Charles. He squeezed Willow's hands, his thumb rubbing her knuckles soothingly. "I do," he said, his voice deep and reassuring. "I promise to protect you, Willow. Always." Willow opened her mouth to speak, to seal a fate she had convinced herself was her only salvation from the legal nightmare threatening to take her children away. Bang! The heavy oak doors of the parlor flew open, slamming against the walls with a violence that made half the guests jump. A collective gasp ripped through the room. Standing in the doorway, swaying on unsteady legs, was Ned Quartermain. He looked like a ghost. His skin was the color of old parchment, his hospital gown tucked haphazardly into a pair of stolen sweatpants, and for bandage still taped to the back of his hand. He was breathless, sweat beading on his forehead, but his eyes, usually warm and jovial, were burning with a feverish, righteous fury. "Stop!" Ned rasped, his voice cracking, but echoing with undeniable command. "Stop this wedding!" "Ned!" Tracy was the first to move, rushing toward her son, her usual steely demeanor shattering into pure maternal panic. "Oh my God, you're awake! You shouldn't be here! You need a doctor! Get away from him!" Ned shouted, shoving past his mother's outstretched hands. He pointed a shaking finger directly at the altar. "At Drew. I'm not the one who needs help. She does." Drew's smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened into cold flint. "Ned," he said, his tone dripping with condescending concern, "you've been in a coma. You're confused. Let's get you back to GH." "I am not confused," Ned roared, finding a reserve of strength that seemed to come from his very soul. He stumbled forward, bracing himself on the back of a chair. I remember everything. I remember why I had the heart attack. Drew, it wasn't just the argument. It was what I saw." Willow pulled her hands away from Drew, taking a step back. "What are you talking about, Ned?" "He's lying to you, Willow," Ned said, his gaze locking onto hers, pleading and desperate. "He didn't just find a way to help you with your legal case. He created the problem." A murmur of confusion and shock rippled through the guests. Michael stood up, his protective stance shifting from his children to the scene unfolding before him. "This is ridiculous," Drew scoffed, stepping down from the altar to intercept Ned. "He's delirious. Someone call an ambulance. I saw you." Ned's voice cut through Drew's deflection like a knife. "2 days before my collapse, I saw you at the boathouse. You weren't alone." The room went deathly silent. "You were meeting with a man," Ned continued, his breathing labored. "A man with a scar running down his neck. I didn't know who he was then, but I remember his face. I saw the file he handed you. It was the blueprint for the evidence planted against Willow." Drew's face twitched, the mask slipping for a fraction of a second. "You're hallucinating." "Am I?" Ned challenged. "I did my homework while I was lying in that bed, listening to the nurses' gossip. That man you met? He's not just some random thug. He's a fixer, a lieutenant for Jen Sidwell." The name dropped like a bomb. Sidwell, the international criminal who had been terrorizing Port Charles from the shadows. Sidwell. Dante Falconeri stepped forward from the back of the room, his police instincts kicking in. "Ned, are you saying Drew is working with Sidwell?" "I'm saying Drew made a deal with the devil," Ned accused, tears of frustration welling in his eyes. I heard you. Drew, I heard you tell him to make it look convincing. You wanted Willow terrified. You wanted her cornered. You wanted her to have nowhere to turn but to you. Willow felt the blood drain from her face. The room spun. She looked at Drew, really looked at him, and saw not the savior she had clung to, but a stranger. Drew, she whispered, her voice trembling. Tell me he's wrong. Drew turned to her, his expression softening into that practiced look of empathy. Willow, honey, look at him. He's brain damaged. He hates me because of the ELQ merger. He's making this up to stop the wedding. I'm not making up the recording. Ned shouted. Drew froze. Ned reached into the pocket of his sweatpants and pulled out a small, sleek digital recorder, the kind used for dictation, the kind Ned Quartermain always carried for songwriting ideas. I had this in my pocket when I walked in on you, Ned said, holding the device up like a holy relic. I hit record the moment I realized what was happening. It's all here, Drew. Your voice. His voice. Discussing the price. Discussing how you'd use this marriage to secure your voting block in ELQ once Willow's assets were transferred to your name for safekeeping. The silence that followed was deafening. It was the sound of a world shattering. Play it, Michael said, his voice low and dangerous. He walked over to Ned, taking the device gently from his uncle's shaking hand. Michael, don't, Drew warned, his voice dropping an octave, the charm completely gone now. You play that, and you destroy this family. You destroyed it a long time ago. Michael spat. He pressed the button. Static crackled through the quiet room, followed by the unmistakable baritone of Drew Kane. She needs to feel like the walls are closing in. If she thinks she's going to prison, she'll agree to the marriage. Once we're married, I control her shares. Sidwell gets his route through the shipping channels, and I get ELQ. A second voice, rough and accented, laughed. You're a cold bastard, Kane. She's the mother of your niece's grandchildren. She's a means to an end. Just get it done. Click. Willow let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. She stumbled back, her heel catching on the hem of her wedding dress, and she would have fallen if Chase hadn't rushed forward to catch her. You? Willow gasped, staring at Drew with horror, as if he were a monster wearing human skin. You did this? The police? The evidence? It was you? Drew looked around the room. He saw the disgust on Tracy's face, the rage in Michael's eyes, the cold professional calculation in Dandy's stance as he reached for his handcuffs. The jig was up. It was business. Drew yelled, throwing his hands up, his facade cracking into jagged shards of arrogance. I did what I had to do. ELQ is slipping away. And you, Willow, you were never going to choose me. Not really. You were always going to run back to Michael the moment things got easy. I just ensured you stayed. You framed her, Dante said, stepping up to Drew, grabbing his wrist and twisting it behind his back. Drew Kane, you have the right to remain silent. You can't do this. It's my wedding day. Drew struggled, but the fight had left him. He looked at Willow one last time, his eyes pleading for understanding that would never come. Willow, I did it for us, to build an empire for us. There is no us, Willow said, her voice shaking but clear. She ripped the veil from her hair and threw it onto the floor. There never was. Ned slumped into a chair, the adrenaline fading, leaving him exhausted. Tracy was at his side instantly, calling for water, for a doctor, but Ned just watched as Dante marched his cousin out of the mansion. The ceremony was in ruins. The flowers seemed to wilt in the heavy air. But as Willow looked at Michael, and then at Ned, she realized the truth. The nightmare wasn't beginning, it had just ended. The real investigation, the one that would drag every dark secret Drew Kane had buried into the light, was just beginning. Next, the steel doors of the Port Charles Juvenile Detention Center buzzed and clicked open. A harsh, mechanical sound that seemed to echo the turmoil in Rocco Falconeri's chest. He stepped out into the cool evening air, clutching a meager bag of personal effects. Beside him stood Detective Nathan West, whose tall, imposing figure usually offered a sense of safety. But tonight, even Nathan's reassuring presence couldn't quell the trembling in Rocco's hands. Easy, "Kid," Nathan said softly, placing a hand on the teenager's shoulder as they walked toward his unmarked sedan. "You're out. It's over." But Rocco knew it wasn't over. It was just beginning. The drive to the Falconeri home was suffocated by a heavy silence. Nathan glanced periodically at Rocco from the driver's seat. He had known Rocco since he was a baby, but the boy sitting next to him wasn't the carefree kid who used to run around the Quartermain mansion. This Rocco was pale, his eyes darting to the shadows of the passing streetlights, his breathing shallow and irregular. "You want to stop for a burger?" Nathan asked, trying to break the tension. "Dante said he'd meet us at home, but we can take a minute." Rocco shook his head violently. "No, I just want to go home." When they arrived at the loft, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken dread. Nathan didn't leave immediately. He sensed something was wrong, deeply wrong. It wasn't just the trauma of being locked up for a crime he didn't commit. It was a terror that seemed to eat Rocco from the inside out. Inside, Rocco paced the living room, refusing to sit. Nathan leaned against the kitchen island, watching him closely. "Rocco," Nathan started, his voice gentle but firm. "I know you didn't destroy Professor Dalton's lab. We're going to prove that. But you're acting like you're still in danger. Is there someone else involved? Did Sidwell threaten you?" At the mention of Jen Sidwell's name, Rocco froze. His face drained of what little color it had left. He hyperventilated, his knees buckling as he slid down to the floor, burying his face in his hands. Nathan was beside him in an instant, kneeling. "Rocco, look at me. You're safe here, but you have to tell me what's going on. What did you see?" "I was there," Rocco whispered, his voice cracking. "I went to the lab to try and talk to Dalton, to beg him to drop the charges. But he wasn't alone." Rocco's eyes glazed over, lost in the horrific memory. Sidwell was there. He was screaming about the election, about the peers. Dalton tried to run, but Sidwell, Rocco choked on a sob. "He shot him, Nathan. He shot him right in the face. There was so much blood." Nathan's detective instincts warred with his concern for the boy. "You saw Sidwell kill Dalton? That's not all." Rocco gasped, the words tumbling out like a dam breaking. "I hid. I was stuck behind the equipment. I couldn't move. And then they came." "Who came?" "Rocco. Grandma Laura," Rocco cried, tears streaming down his face. "And Grandpa Sonny." Nathan stiffened. "Laura and Sonny?" "Rocco, think carefully. What did they do?" "They didn't call the cops," Rocco said, his voice dropping to a haunted whisper. "Grandma was crying, panicking about the body in her trunk. Sidwell put it there to frame her. But Grandpa, he told her they had to get rid of it. I watched them, Nathan. I watched my grandparents clean up the blood. I watched them take the body away." The revelation hit Nathan like a physical blow. The mayor of Port Charles and the most powerful mob boss in the territory conspiring to cover up a capital murder. It was a scandal that would not just destroy a family, it would level the city. The interrogation room at the PCPD had never felt colder. The following morning, the news had shattered the fragile peace of Port Charles. Rocco's statement, taken by Nathan and corroborated by a terrified but detailed walkthrough of the crime scene, had leaked. The headlines were screaming, "Mayor and mob boss implicated in Dalton murder cover-up." Laura Collins sat at the metal table, her posture rigid, her face a mask of stoic despair. Across town, Sonny Corinthos was being held in a separate holding cell, his lawyers already swarming the station. The city was in an uproar. The idea that the beloved mayor, a pillar of resilience, had participated in disposing of a corpse was unfathomable to the public. Yet the accusation came from her own grandson. Nathan stood behind the one-way glass, watching Laura. Beside him stood Dante Falconeri. Dante looked like a man who had been hollowed out. His eyes were red-rimmed, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle feathered in his cheek. "He's sure, Dante," Nathan said quietly. Rocco described the scene perfectly. The cleaning supplies they used, the way Sonny wrapped the body. Details only a witness would know. Dante slammed his hand against the wall, the sound echoing in the small observation room. "My son," he hissed, his voice thick with betrayal and agony. "My son watched his grandfather and his grandmother cover up a murder? How the hell am I supposed to process that?" "Nathan, we have to process it as cops first," Nathan said, though he felt the sickness in his own gut. "Sidwell is the killer. We know that. But Laura and Sonny, they obstructed justice. They tampered with evidence in a homicide investigation. They were trying to protect her," Dante argued weakly, though he knew it didn't matter. "Sidwell framed her. If the cops found Dalton in her trunk, then she should have called us," Nathan countered. "She's the mayor, Dante. She knows better. And Sonny, he dragged her down into his world completely this time." The investigation moved with brutal speed. Nathan and Dante, a partnership forged in years of service and friendship, now found themselves dissecting the lives of the people they loved. They obtained security footage from the perimeter of the university lab, grainy images that showed a vehicle matching Laura's arriving and leaving during the critical window. They found traces of bleach and industrial cleaner in the trunk of the mayor's car, despite the thorough job Sonny had done. The pressure from the district attorney was immense. The governor's office was calling every hour. Port Charles was a powder keg. The citizens felt betrayed. The trust in the mayor's office had evaporated overnight. Protesters gathered outside the PCPD, chanting for justice for Professor Dalton, a man who, despite his own flaws, had been butchered and treated like trash by the city's elite. Inside the interrogation room, Nathan finally sat down across from Laura. "Laura," Nathan said, his voice devoid of the warmth she was used to, "Rocco told us everything. He saw you." Laura flinched, her composure cracking. "Rocco." Oh God, Rocco was there. He was hiding, Nathan confirmed. "He saw Sidwell kill Dalton, and he saw you and Sonny choose to hide the truth rather than trust the law." Laura put her head in her hands, weeping openly. "I didn't know he was there. I was so scared, Nathan. Sidwell, he set it up so perfectly. It was in my car. I thought if I called the police, no one would believe me. I thought I would lose everything. Sonny was just trying to help." "Sonny isn't the mayor," Nathan said sharply. "You are. And now, because of that choice, Rocco is traumatized, and you are facing felony charges." Meanwhile, in the holding cell, Dante stood face to face with his father. The bars between them felt like a canyon. "You should have called me," Dante said, his voice low and dangerous. Sonny sat on the cot, looking uncharacteristically tired. "I handled it, Dante, like I always do." "You didn't handle anything," Dante roared. "You turned a frame-up into a conspiracy. You made my son a witness to a crime scene cleanup. Do you have any idea what that did to him? He's terrified of you, Dad. He's terrified of Laura." Sonny looked up, a flicker of pain crossing his eyes. "I did it to save her. Sidwell is the enemy here, not me." "Sidwell pulled the trigger," Dante said, turning his back on his father. "But you and Laura buried the truth, and now I have to be the one to dig it up." As the days turned into a week, the scandal reshaped the power dynamics of Port Charles. The city council voted to suspend Laura pending the investigation. Deputy Mayor Bobby Spencer, had she been alive, would have been heartbroken. But the interim leadership fell to political sharks who smelled blood in the water. Sonny's organization was also hit, with the boss under intense scrutiny and facing serious jail time for accessory to murder. The other 5 families began to circle, sensing weakness. The peers, the territory Sidwell had killed for, were now vulnerable. But the emotional toll was the heaviest. At the Falconeri loft, Rocco refused to leave his room. He couldn't face the world, couldn't face the grandmother who had baked him cookies or the grandfather who had taught him to box. In his eyes, they were now monsters, figures distorted by the blood and fear of that night in the lab. Nathan and Dante sat in the squad room late one night, surrounded by files. The coffee was cold and the mood was grim. "We have enough to indict," Nathan said, closing a folder. Rocco's testimony, the forensics from the car, the timeline. It's solid. Dante stared at the badge on his chest. If we do this, if we testify against them, the family is done. There's no coming back from this. Nathan looked at his partner, seeing the impossible weight he carried. I know, but if we bury this, we're no better than they are. And Rocco, he needs to see that the truth matters, that the law matters. If we let them walk, we lose him forever. Dante nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. You're right. We follow the evidence, wherever it leads. The article of their lives was being written in headlines and court documents. The Dalton murder had started as a mob hit, but it had metastasized into a tragedy that exposed the dark, rotting heart of Port Charles' most powerful alliances. As the sun rose over the harbor, casting long shadows across the city, the reality settled in. The era of Laura and Sonny's untouchable reign was over, dismantled by the truth of a frightened boy and the duty of the men who had sworn to protect him.